Good morning, it's Cindy Tonkin presenting with Presence. This is week 4. So in week 1 we looked at the Wonder Woman pose about nervousness and excitement, about being more audience focused and less self-obsessed, and actually practicing rather than just preparing. We also, then in week 2 we looked at the 4 different approaches, the different learning style, what, where, why, what, how and what if. And then we looked at how people are like Porsches, and you'll remember my story about my little red car and the Porsche, because essentially people are like Porsches because they're predictable, because they work with status, and essentially their performance. We wanted to get the brains working for us, and then we worked at PDFs and how to deal with those questions we don't really want to answer, so that we can actually be happy to answer questions. So one of the solutions we looked at was essentially story, using story to get to the idea that we want to answer. So not answering the question necessarily they asked, but answering the question you wanted them to ask. Now, so this week is all about stories. There are a number of barriers to people using story, and I want to talk about them very quickly. There's the barrier of the water-mitty problem, which is essentially, oh, my life's not interesting, everybody else has an interesting life, stories from my life can't be interesting. We're going to talk about how that isn't necessarily true, because it's not about the story or the song, it's about the singer. And part of what makes it interesting and true is the vulnerability that comes from you telling the story. People say that there isn't enough time to tell the story. This isn't necessarily true either. If you get your story succinct, there is always time. And people remember stories and forget facts. People believe that sometimes that their stories aren't relevant, and I'm going to give you some keys today to show you how to make stories more relevant. And essentially people worry about they can't find stories. Well, stories are happening to us all the time. So you will find, once you begin to switch on to story, that they are absolutely everywhere. So there are a number of things that we are going to look at today. The first one is essentially the one thing you should never do with stories and examples. And how do we then, the 3 things that make story relevant. And then I'm going to start with a blank slate. I'm going to literally improvise for you a couple of stories, and for each story have a different ending based on a different outcome. So I'm going to randomly choose some of those difficult questions that I have listed from previous participants, and link the same story to each of those questions and make it a satisfactory answer. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think it might. So that's our week. Looking forward to working with you.